Because of the Empress's reckless command, I was still nursing my wounds while forced into battle. I removed my crimson robes to don my heavy armor for the sake of the Empire. The red eagle flag was soaked in blood as white bones piled into mountains across the field. When the 100th sword finally pierced through my body, I heard the distant cries of my soldiers. My generals shouted that we had won, telling me we could finally go home. I laughed weakly while gazing at the Great Joe banner flying far in the distance. I whispered Serena's name, wondering if she was finally overjoyed by my victory. I felt a deep desire to sleep as the shouting around me gradually faded away. I completely fell into a darkness so deep that I thought it was hell. But when I opened my eyes again, I found myself floating inside the Imperial Palace. I looked at Serena Thorne sitting before her golden throne, appearing like an illusion. I reached out to touch her face, but her cold gaze swept right past me. A messenger suddenly reported the victory at the front lines, announcing the recapture of Lake Shire. Serena stood up immediately and asked if Lucien had finally returned. She hurried out without even waiting to hear the full battle report or my name. I smiled weakly because she would never know that I paid for this victory with my life. My soul was pulled by an invisible force, forcing me to drift behind her. She greeted Lucien Sterling at the palace gates with a warmth she never showed me. Watching her retreat, I remembered when we were children in the cold palace. She had promised me then that she would protect me for life when she became Empress. Instead, her first decree upon ascending the throne was ordering me to march into war. I realized then that I was always the only one burdened with unrequited love. Suddenly, an intense pain struck my soul as I saw my very essence beginning to dissipate. I welcomed the end, glad that I could finally leave her behind completely. In my final moment, I heard a soldier shouting that General Garrison had fallen in battle. I wondered if she would feel even a shred of remorse once the news reached her heart. She had ordered 30 lashes against me just because I dared to advise against this war. Her obsession with Lucien Sterling was enough to make her risk the stability of the entire empire. I was known as the war god of Great Joe, having won 90 battles without a single defeat. This time, I successfully retrieved the one in her heart while sacrificing my own life. I saw Lucien safely escorted home while I stood alone against an enemy raid. Floating in the palace, I realized Lucien was indeed the most beautiful man in the world. I looked at my own palms, which were full of calluses from years of wielding heavy swords. Who could ever truly love a warrior who always smelled of blood and iron? I noticed that even in death, my body was still covered in horrifying arrow wounds. Lucien entered the palace and saw that the walls were covered with his own portraits. Serena had painted every single one of them by her own hand during his absence. She told him that now that he was by her side, the paintings were no longer needed. In the following days, precious treasures flowed like water into Lucien's personal palace. Serena shocked the entire court by decreeing that she would marry him in half a month. The ministers knelt in protest, but Serena refused to change her stubborn mind. Returning to her chambers, she leaned back and asked me to massage her headache. I floated behind her in shock, realizing she had forgotten I was no longer there. In the silent hall, she seemed to realize her mistake and fell into a deep silence. She remarked that I had great martial skills and there was no reason to worry about me. I finally understood that I was never anything more than a tool and a blade for her. I muttered to the darkness that she had deceived me for my entire life. The silence in the throne room felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest after the messengers departed. I stared at the blood-stained report on the floor, unable to reconcile the words with the man I had ignored. Lucien stood beside me, whispering comforts that sounded like grating noise against my ears. My mind kept drifting back to Adrien's final gaze before he marched toward the northern front. I stood up abruptly, brushing past Lucien without a single word of acknowledgement. I needed to find the truth hidden within the general's private archives. My hands trembled as I inserted the master key into the lock of his study. The room smelled of cedarwood and old parchment, exactly like he always did. I approached the desk where a single leather-bound journal sat waiting. I opened the first page and saw my own name written in his disciplined script. The entries detailed years of threats he had neutralized without ever telling me. He had spent his nights rooting out assassins while I spent mine laughing with Lucien. I found a dried flower pressed between the pages from the day of our hollow coronation. His notes revealed that he knew Lucien was a spy, yet he stayed silent to protect my happiness. A letter from the front lines lay unfinished, dated just hours before his death. In it, he apologized for not being strong enough to win the war I had forced him into. I collapsed onto his chair, the reality of my cruelty finally shattering my pride. I screamed his name into the empty room, but only the wind answered back. The throne I loved so much now felt like a pile of cold, jagged glass. I spent days locked away, refusing food in the hollow comfort of my advisors. When Lucian tried to enter, I threw a crystal decanter at the door, shattering it into pieces. I began to see Adrien in every shadow, a ghostly reminder of what I had thrown away. I realized that no amount of power could bring back the heart that beat only for me. I clutched his old cloak, buried my face in the fabric, and begged for a single second chance. My tears soaked the heavy wool as I apologized to a man who could no longer hear me. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped until my breath turned into white mist. The shadows on the wall began to move independently of the flickering candles. A soft golden light began to pulse from the center of the room. A voice that sounded like 1,000 whispers echoed within my mind. The voice asked if I would sacrifice everything to undo the sins of my past. I promised to give up my crown, my pride, and even my life for his sake. A sudden, searing heat surged through my veins, making me lose my balance. The walls of the room seemed to melt away into a vortex of color and sound. I felt my memories being pulled and stretched like hot wax. For a moment, I saw Adrien standing in a field of flowers, smiling at me. Then, the vision shattered and I felt a violent jolt throughout my entire body. I sat up and realized I was in my old bedroom, the one I occupied 5 years ago. The date on the calendar confirmed that the tragic war had not yet begun. I realized that the gods had actually granted me the chance to save him. I would not be the same foolish Empress who let her protector die for nothing. Just then, a knock at the door signaled the arrival of my personal guard. My heart hammered against my ribs as the door creaked open slowly. There he stood, Adrien Garrison, alive and breathing, looking at me with his usual stoic mask. I wanted to scream, to run to him and hold him, but I had to maintain my composure. He announced that Lucian had arrived at the palace gates to seek an audience with me. The name of the man who ruined my life sparked a fire of pure hatred in my soul. I told Adrien to turn Lucian away and prepare for a private meeting with me instead. Adrien's eyes flickered with confusion, as if he couldn't believe my sudden change of heart. I realized that saving him meant I would have to change every single choice I ever made. But as I approached him, I noticed a strange, dark mark on his neck that I didn't remember from the first time. I wondered if the price of my rebirth had already begun to manifest in a way I hadn't expected. The sudden weight of reality crashed against my chest as I gasped for breath in the quiet room. I stared blankly at my soft, unblemished palms, which were completely free from the ashes of my ruined kingdom. My eyes drifted to the ornate full-length mirror standing across the room, reflecting a version of myself from 5 years ago. I threw the heavy silk blankets aside and swung my legs over the edge of the high mattress. My bare feet made no sound against the thick carpet as I rushed toward the tall glass windows. I pushed the heavy glass panels open, feeling the crisp, clean air of the capital hit my face. The grand spires of the empire stood whole and proud, proving that the terrible war had not yet begun. Tears filled my eyes as I realized the spiritual intervention had actually given me a second chance. I turned back into the room with a fierce resolve burning deep inside my aching heart. I pulled open the heavy wooden wardrobe doors, searching for a dress that wasn't meant for mourning. I quickly selected a vibrant blue gown that matched the colors of the Garrison House crest. My fingers fumbled with the intricate laces, driven by an overwhelming urge to see him immediately. I refused to call my maids, wanting no delays to keep me from correcting my ultimate sin. I grabbed the golden royal seal from my desk, knowing it held the power to change history. A sudden memory of Adrien bleeding on the battlefield flashed vividly behind my eyelids. I shook my head to dispel the nightmare, and ran toward the massive chamber doors. The twin guards outside bowed instantly as I threw the doors open with uncharacteristic force. I demanded to know the current location of General Adrien Garrison without greeting them. The lead guard stammered that the general was currently preparing his troops in the grand courtyard. Panic flared within me because today was the exact day he was scheduled to march south. I gathered my long skirt in both hands and sprinted down the endless marble hallway. Every heartbeat echoed his name as I desperately prayed that I wouldn't be too late to save him. The heavy scent of iron and leather reached my nose as I neared the exit to the courtyard. I burst through the archway and saw hundreds of soldiers standing in flawless military formation. There he stood at the front, wearing the heavy black armor that I had once despised so deeply. His back was turned to me, but the sheer sight of his living figure made my knees weak. I screamed his name across the silent field, shattering the strict military discipline of the legions. Adrien turned around slowly, his dark eyes widening in utter confusion at my sudden appearance. I didn't care about royal decorum as I sprinted through the rows of stunned soldiers straight toward him. Before he could even salute, I threw myself into his armored chest, hugging him with all my strength. Adrien stiffened instantly, his arms freezing at his sides as if he were touching a ghost. I could hear the steady, rapid thumping of his heart, confirming that he was truly alive and breathing. He softly asked what was wrong, his deep voice carrying the familiar guarded tone I had once neglected. I pulled back slightly, looking up into his handsome face while still holding onto his iron gauntlets. I loudly declared to the entire assembly that the Southern military campaign was officially cancelled. A collective murmur broke out among the officers as they traded looks of profound bewilderment. Adrien frowned deeply, asking if this was another one of my schemes to favor the interests of Lucien. The mention of that name stabbed through me, reminding me of how terribly I had broken Adrien's trust before. I squeezed his metal hands tighter, swearing that my only interest from this day forward was him alone. Adrien looked down at me with an unreadable expression, completely unsettled by my sudden change of heart. I raised the golden royal seal high into the air so that every soldier could see the official decree. I ordered the legions to return to their barracks and dismantle the war preparations immediately. Adrien quietly told me that while he would obey, a sudden cancellation would stir heavy suspicion in the Senate. I reached up to gently touch his scarred cheek, promising him that I would handle the lords myself. His eyes flickered with a deep, hidden longing that he quickly suppressed behind his usual mask of iron. I walked side by side with him back toward the throne room, determined to rewrite our tragic destiny together. As we entered the grand hall, a headmaid ran toward us with a look of severe panic on her pale face. She breathlessly announced that Lord Lucien had just discovered a hidden correspondence in the western borders. I watched Adrien's face instantly harden into a cold, distrusting glare as he looked down at the royal seal. A terrifying realization gripped me as I wondered if the secrets of my past obsession were already being unraveled by the enemy. The morning light offered no comfort as the heavy wooden doors of my private study creaked open. On my desk lay an old weathered leather trunk that I had explicitly ordered my guards to burn weeks ago. The brass lock was completely shattered, and its contents were haphazardly exposed to the cold room. Inside the box were hundreds of detailed love letters and obsessive journal entries dedicated entirely to Lucien from my past life. A single pair of heavy footsteps echoed from the stone corridor outside, signaling an inevitable confrontation. General Adrien Garrison stepped through the threshold, his dark eyes carrying a profound, shattering coldness. He dropped a bundle of intercepted secret documents onto the floor, his knuckles white with repressed fury. Adrien asked me in a hollow voice why his entire existence had been a mere shield for another man's safety. I reached out to touch his armored arm, frantically pleading that the letters belonged to a woman I no longer was. He stepped backward slowly, evading my touch as if my hands were stained with poison. He confessed that he had uncovered Lucien's covert movement to mobilize an enemy army at our northern border. Before I could explain the timeline of my rebirth, a loud brass horn blared from the watchtowers, signaling an immediate invasion. Lucien had struck first, utilizing the secrets he gathered during my past life's foolish infatuation to bypass our primary defenses. Adrien drew his heavy claymore, his personal heartbreak instantly replacing itself with the duty of a seasoned commander. He told me that he would save the Empire one last time, but explicitly stated it was for the people, not for me. Refusing to let him die a second time, I tightly strapped on my own ceremonial gold armor and grabbed my royal bow. The palace courtyard turned into a horrific sea of flashing steel and crimson banners as the enemy breached the inner ring. I rode into the thick of the chaos on my white stallion, raining precise arrows down upon the traitorous invaders. Through the thick smoke, I spotted Adrien fighting fiercely, surrounded by a dozen enemy elite knights. An enemy assassin leaped from a broken stone balcony, aiming a poisonous dagger directly at Adrien's unprotected neck. My arrow flew true across the courtyard, piercing the assassin's heart before he could even touch the general. Adrien turned his head quickly, his eyes locking onto mine as he realized I had just saved his life. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and Lucien emerged on a black warhorse, wearing a wicked, arrogant smirk. Lucien taunted Adrien aloud, claiming that the Empress would always belong to him, regardless of who won the war. The sheer disrespect ignited a primordial rage within Adrien, causing his aura to burst forth with blinding golden light. He charged forward like a meteor, his claymore clashing violently against Lucian's heavy silver spear. I dismounted my horse swiftly and sprinted toward them, determined to ensure history would not repeat its tragic end. Lucian pulled a concealed crossbow from his saddle, aiming it directly at Adrien's heart during their close blade lock. I leaped between them without a single thought, slashing the hidden crossbow in half with my own steel blade. Lucian staggered back in absolute disbelief that the woman who once worshipped him was now trying to execute him. I looked down at him cold-bloodedly, declaring that my past foolishness died the moment I watched a true hero perish. With a final, roaring overhead strike, Adrien shattered Lucian's silver armor and ended the treasonous rebellion once and for all. The remaining rebel forces dropped their weapons in terror, surrendering as the morning sun began to breach the heavy smoke. Adrien stood perfectly still amidst the bodies, his heavy breathing the only sound left in the quieted plaza. I approached him slowly, removing my dented golden helmet and letting my messy hair fall freely in the wind. Tears streamed down my face as I apologized for all the pain I had caused him across 2 different lifetimes. Adrien looked up, and for the first time the icy walls in his dark eyes melted into a look of profound understanding. He reached out a dirt-stained gauntlet, gently wiping a single tear from my cheek with surprising tenderness. He whispered that the past no longer mattered, because the woman standing before him now was the only one he ever wanted to protect. Hand in hand, we turned toward the grand steps of the throne room, ready to rule an era defined not by obsession, but by true loyalty and love,